Well, hello, everybody. Guess what? Do not be a single stat sucker. What is a single stat sucker? We're going to tell you. Let's get started. My name is Stephen Meade with Domicile Real Estate here in Southern California, and this is our Southern California housing market update. And we're talking about single stat suckers. A single stat sucker is the kind of person who watches videos that examine one market stat and they believe that that explains the entire real estate market. It does not, especially in the kind of market we are in, which is a very sort of schizoid, uncertain market, right? This is like after there is a storm, you know how weather people talk about unstable air. That is exactly the kind of market that we're in. Let's jump into the stats because I'm going to explain to you why it's important to look at the whole picture when you are attempting to determine not only where the market is, but also where the market is going so you can make better real estate decisions. So if we take a look here at total active listings, right, this is kind of an interesting graph because this is positive and negative news if you are a buyer and a seller, right? This is a bit of a mixed bag, even on the same chart. So on one hand, we've got active listings are lower than they are last year for our under 1 million category, right? Our entry-level buyers. They were a little bit higher for our $1 to $2 million buyers. And just to remind everybody, this is for Los Angeles and Orange counties. But you see they're actually trending upward. And if you look at the graph here, especially under $1 million, I feel like we bottomed out at a lower level last year and then started ascending kind of through those summer months with inventory getting better. So I would argue we actually have a slightly better baseline. And you can see we even have a little bit of an increase, right? So maybe good news for buyers in this category. Things are a little bit better. Same story here, 1 to 2 million. If we're talking about new listings in the last 14 days, bad news for sellers here. More things have been coming on the market this year, probably by about 10%, 10-15% versus last year. That is in both price categories. So again, kind of some good news for buyers here. New escrows in the last 14 days. This is an interesting one. This is also a little bit of good news for sellers. We're about the same levels we were last year under $1 million, but definitely a higher level of new escrows in that $1 to $2 million category. So some good news for sellers here. And our absorption rate, this one is kind of interesting to me. And you can see what an unstable market this is. We saw absorption rate jump up and then immediately kind of leveled off. This actually makes sense when you think about it. If you track this against interest rates, you can see that we were kind of set up in this market. We were basically set up for a blockbuster spring, and then rates decided to jump, and that's kind of creating this sort of turbulent water in our marketplace. Here is the graph, right, that I think most people would focus on if they're making a real estate video, and you should not be stuck on this graph. So we have talked about this many, many times before. Closed prices are a look into the past. They tell you about where the market was 4 to 6 weeks ago. They do not necessarily tell you about where the market is, right? And we talked about this, that there was going to be a coming sort of price jump was going to show up in here. And in fact, it has. But again, this is based on transactions that were negotiated 4 to 6 weeks ago. What was different about 4 to 6 weeks ago? Rates were significantly lower. And I think especially in these lower price categories, that makes a much bigger difference. And you see that's why there's kind of this hockey stick like look to this pricing. Rates went down, buyers jumped in the market, prices for those contracts jumped up. I do not think that this is long-term or sustainable given where rates are at this exact moment in time. So 4 to 6 weeks from now, what are we going to see on this graph? Well, we're going to see some of these things ease a little bit. Now, here's another piece of conflicting data. This is our percent still active after 14 days in the market. This is another measurement of sort of how competitive is the market. Lower is more competitive. So despite the fact that we have seen the prices jump up, despite the fact that we're seeing inventory pictures actually a little bit better than last year, this still active percentage indicates to a very competitive marketplace out there. So like I said, whenever you're seeing these multiple stats, right, we're looking for a trend across multiple statistics to come to a conclusion. Do not be a single stat sucker. Now, if we look at our close to listing ratio, again, that is firmly above 100%. We've been kind of hovering in that range, but I would argue this is pretty, this is elevated. Again, this is a trailing statistic. It is 4 to 6 weeks old because it is based on closed sales. Now, here is one that is a more current statistic, days on market for new contracts. So this is how long are the homes actually that are going under contract, how long were they on the market for? Well, we are seeing this number trend downward again towards around that 30-day number. It's a bit more competitive than it was last year, but I see signs that this is leveling out. I don't know if we're going to get to that low 20s like we did last year in June. It all depends on really kind of where that mortgage market is, because that is what drives the under $1 million market. I'm going to go off screen share here just for a second. This is why we divide up these stats between under $1 million and 1 to 2 million, because those buyers in that range and sellers are motivated by different things. They have different forces acting on them. And that's the reason why you're going to see differences in some of these numbers and why we treat these markets differently. So, okay, we can jump back in here. This is the one that I think really tells us a lot about what's happening and the reason why this is a very turbulent market. So you have to remember, this is our three-way chart. So just as a reminder, what are we covering? We are covering the CPI index. We're covering our rent index, which is the median rent on a single family home in Los Angeles and Orange counties, right? So this is the rental equivalent of buying a house, right? Like you could buy a house or you could rent a house. And what's interesting about these graphs is that they are somewhat linked, right? Like, so if we look at here and we were to draw kind of a trend line on that payment index, where would we end up, right? We would end up probably somewhere in the middle here, right? Like we have a kind of a spike going on, both because of interest rates and because of that median close price. But look at that rent index. That has done the same thing. And, this brings me to another point. This is something that we try to talk about often because I think it is very, very important. I don't care whether you are a buyer, whether you are a seller. One of the most important things that you can consider is this idea that just deferring making a choice is still making a choice. But what it's doing is it's not making a deliberate or intentional choice. And, we try to get people with our clients. Our goal is not always to have you buy or sell a house. Our goal is to help you reach a great decision that is intentional, it's deliberate, and it's the result of careful thought. That is our goal. When you just defer or decide you don't feel like making a decision, what you're doing is you are being like a ship, right? With no hand on the wheel. You're just moving whatever direction the currents move you. Not a smart way to make real estate decisions, in my opinion. Finally, we've got our prevailing mortgage rate chart. As you can see, people are talking about where we were at this point last year. That is about correct. We are still well off our peak from last year, which occurred last year in the fall, but things are rising. I think this is going to temper around that 7% range for a while until we get a little bit more clarity from the Federal Reserve about their thoughts on inflation. And really, that's what drives mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are driven by expectations of future inflation. And so when you find there's a new piece of news that comes out, for example, CPI is higher than expected, workforce is better than expected, that news changes that trajectory and that outlook for people in the mortgage bond market, and that is what affects mortgage rates. The Federal Reserve does not set mortgage rates, but their decisions are often highly correlated with bond traders' thoughts about inflation in the future, because that is essentially what the Fed is always trying to regulate and control. Anyhow, that's all we've got for you. Last update of February in 2024. Once again, my name is Stephen Meade with Domicile Real Estate. We would absolutely love to work with you. Questions and comments, definitely leave them. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And we will see you again real soon.